To say, I think in some ways, poetry, more than any other form of writing, is very similar to music. I mean, it's got that lyrical quality. You know, you can just listen to a song. You don't have to like the whole album by the band. You can just listen to one song and find it wonderful, which is why we have these little 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝘆𝘀𝘀 collections that we call anthologies. It's so, like you said, you don't like all of it that you see
Yeah.
on Instagram, maybe, but that's okay. And you
Yeah.
can just get exposed to it. And there's a whole lot of poetry that I do not like. There's
Yeah.
a lot of it that I just doesn't click for me in the same way. And that's okay. But I do. So when people say, do you like poetry or not like poetry? It's kind of a strange question sometimes because
Hmm.
you'll meet people who say, I don't like poetry.
Mhm.
And it just makes me feel like Diana was mentioning that they just haven't been exposed to it in the right way.
Well, being a poet in California can mean different things depending on what perspective you're thinking of. It could be someone that writes about landscapes, but it can also be about poets that are inspired by being in California.
Mm.
California is a mecca of creativity. I live in the Santa Barbara area, and we have a lot of creatives here. And it's a really great way to become inspired. Our landscapes, we've got varied landscapes, mountains, desert, ocean. And so the whole idea of California dreaming is real. California's been long associated with innovation and poets, in Silicon Valley, etc. And so also being in California, we're standing on the shoulders of some giant poets like Ginsberg and Robertson Jeffers and 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 and many, many others. And so I think being a poet in California in 2025 is really about, I would say, navigating the landscape while being enriched with the technological tools that we have, which sometimes
Mhm.
are a blessing, sometimes are a curse.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
also about the collective consciousness. I think we're becoming more of a collective consciousness about spreading the word about poetry. People are less intimidated by poetry and, sharing their feelings through poetry, which is an emotional genre, showing their feelings about contemporary issues through the art of poetry. And I see this happening more and more unless there's much less of an intimidation poetry. You were asking like how it's going to change in the future. I just think that people are less intimidated. It's on social media a little bit more. The poems are poems that are accessible and they resonate with people.
Now, what was the submission criteria and how did you shape your vision for the anthology? And how long did that take?
Well, I think one of the strengths of the book is that there wasn't a very, very strict vision going into it. Um, we kind of shaped the collection based on the poems that came from the submitters.
Mm.
So at first we thought, we were getting poems from people that were established poets that we knew how to contact, who are familiar with how to respond. And they were sending us, 3-page poems or, a bunch of different poems for us to select from. And we think, oh, we're going to take 3 poems from this person and 3 poems from that person. But then we continued to get this flood of poetry and from voices that were completely unfamiliar to us, people that we'd never met. And some of their bios. One of my favorite parts of this book is the bios at the back,
Mhm.
where you have somebody who's, a woman in her 70s or 80s who has had a full career doing something unrelated to literature, unrelated to writing in any way, who has come to poetry late in life, has never published a book, but is able to write these poems that you just can connect with. You can feel the emotional truth in them and the wisdom in them. And it doesn't necessarily come just from a life of being a poet. It comes from having a full life as a
I
woman.
think I was glad because we were going back and forth about having less poets and having, 3 poems from one poet, from each poet. But I think we get more diversity this way. And I like the idea that Chryss had about 175 poems to celebrate the anniversary of California, 175 years. That was a fantastic idea.
Mhm.
Put it sort of, good for the marketing.
Mhm.
And we gave more people a chance to get published, which was great. Although it was
Mhm.
a lot of work dealing with 175 people. Uh, and